guys, welcome back to my channel. Can't believe I'm saying that. So today I'm going to show you guys how I make SpaghettiOs. This is something that I ate in my childhood that I affectionately remember being so delicious. And now as an adult, number one, they taste like trash. And number two, the ingredients are trash. And I don't know if they were trash in the 90s when I ate them or not, but they are now. So, as a mother, I know better and kind of want to avoid those ingredients. So, but I also want to provide my kids with some of those like cool, nostalgic foods that I got to eat as a kid. So that's what we're doing. We're going to make our own. Now, to start with, canning pasta is considered rebel canning. What is rebel canning? It means I'm canning outside of the lines of those set forth by the USDA and distributed by the NCHFP that are considered safe and tested, proven recipes. Does not mean it's unsafe, also does not mean you have to do it. What I'm doing in my own home and then sharing in a video on YouTube is not me saying do this or else, okay? But if they can can it in the store, I can can it at home. And I have proven that time and time again talking on social media about how our home canning processes were derived from commercial canning processes. Anyway, we're going to start by making the meatballs because SpaghettiOs are not the same without the little mini meatballs. And instead of canning them inside the SpaghettiO jar and increasing the canning time and therefore making this small pasta basically inedible, I can them separately. Also, because I like the texture of meatballs better if I fry them up after canning as opposed to just eating them out of the jar. Canned meat takes on, especially like ground meat, meatballs, or patties, when you can them, they take on more of a soft kind of mealy texture, which is completely negated if you fry them hard, whether it be in a pan or throw them in the air fryer for a while till they're nice and crisp again. It really does help with the texture and flavor of canned food. As always, though, like making your ground beef or your meatballs fresh from frozen or fresh meat is a lot better than canned stuff, but sometimes convenience wins. And for me, making meatballs and canning them is better than throwing them back in the freezer because I do not like putting a bunch of food in the freezer. Freezers fail, my jars will not. That is my opinion. Now, for meatballs, I have a meatball recipe on my website on how to make them, how to can them. I did not follow my own recipe. I was out of breadcrumbs this day and I was like, ugh, it's fine. It can't be that bad. No, they were really dry and sad. They're okay, like mixed into the SpaghettiOs. It's fine, but they weren't my meatballs. They weren't that good. And I used about half of these for dinner that night. So I was like, oh, these are the driest meatballs I have ever made. Now, if you add the the tested recipe says to make balls of meat. That's it. You can season them. So the NCHOP is just going to say you can make meats. I can't talk today, but you can make meatballs, just balls of meat, and you can spice it, but you cannot add, eggs, the dairy, the breadcrumbs that I normally do. Well, you can add. It is not recommended because they did not test it. But what it produces is just this weird ball of meat that really doesn't want to stick together, and it's actually kind of dry and sad. I don't want to can dry and sad food. So for me, I'm gonna follow that meatball recipe to a T next time and take the time to dry out some of my bread and restock the breadcrumbs, which I'm actually doing today. I had half a loaf of sourdough bread that I had made. It was kind of dense because I used fresh milk flour and I'm trying to figure out sourdough and it's been just the worst learning curve ever. Like learning fresh milk flour was fine. Sourdough with fresh milk flour, whole nother beast. So I'm drying those out so I can make proper meatballs next time. Now, when I can meatballs, and you'll see this in my blog post as well, I like to dry pack them. What is dry pack canning? Dry pack canning simply means I'm not adding any extra liquid to the jar. Now, you will see things online about folks saying, the thermal process can't happen without liquid, which I have talked about quite a bit on my website, and I have a blog post on dry pack canning and my opinion of it and my understanding and scientific evidence. So, you do what you want with that. Now, for canning, here's another little word of advice. People frequently confuse the words sanitize and sterilize. When we think of canning, we think everything's got to be sterile or we're going to die of botulism and all this stuff. But even from the NCHFP and the powers that be are going to tell you if your canning times are greater than 10 minutes or you are pressure canning, your jars do not need to be sterilized. You are actually just wasting your time. Instead, they just need to be sanitized. What does sanitize mean? Wash them in hot soapy water and set them aside. They just need to be clean. And unfortunately for me, I've got a creepy cellar that's kind of dirty. There's bugs and sometimes mice down there and all that stuff. So my jars do get kind of dirty in storage. So I do have to wash them. In my last house in my basement, I would just bring them up and can them because they stayed clean. But anyway, sanitize, wash your jars. Now, if you are canning something for less than 10 minutes in a water bath, you can simply increase the canning time to 10 minutes because it's usually just jams and jelly, which are 10 minutes anyway. It'll be fine. You are so obsessed with sterilizing some of these people, and then they're putting unsterile food into their quote unquote sterile jar. And your dirty hands and stuff. Like, if I'm a nurse, so I understand sterile field and keeping things sterile, this is not it. So do with that what you want. If it makes you feel better to run them through the dishwasher or run them through your steam canner and get them nice and hot, that's fine. But for me, I'm going to clean them, I'm going to set them aside. Another thing is the thermal shock. So everybody is, and even the books will tell you, you have to have hot jars and hot liquid. And that's just, I don't do that. I don't heat my jars prior to canning. I make sure they're room temperature. If I bring them straight from my cellar and I wash them in hot soapy water, that makes them room temperature. I don't want to bring them from the freezer and put a boiling liquid in. Thermal shock normally happens when you add something cold to hot. So you're going to see people have thermal shock happen, and it's normally because they've had their jar in boiling water, they get it out and it cools down, or it doesn't cool down enough and the food they're putting into it is not as hot as the jar. Then it busts. Same with if you take a jar and then you're putting it into simmering canning water. I don't do that. For my water bath, I just put hot water from the tap over the jars and call it good. And I've never had trouble with thermal shock. When I did have trouble with thermal shock, was trying to heat jars, have hot food, and then put those jars back into boiling water like these books tell me. I was having bottoms bust out. It is completely ridiculous and dumb to me. But again, do what you want. But that's my little blurb on thermal shock. Past that, you're going to see me here. I am reusing lids. I'm just doing all kinds of illegal activity. And when I say illegal activity, people take me so literally. When I say that, I mean that sarcastically, as in, this is not approved canning. And I don't care. Because when you reuse a lid, the worst thing that's going to happen, not botulism, not instant death, your lid's not going to seal. And for me, I've learned how to check the lid and how to reuse a used lid to make it work for me. So you want to make sure that enamel's intact, and the imprint from the previous lid, you just want to line up with the rim of the jar. That's it. And then put your screw band on. Now, since these are in half pint jars, we are going to can them for pint jar times in the pressure canner. When canning, you can size down your jars. You can't size up. So if you have a half pint, can it for pint times. If you've got a 3/4 pint, which is super hard to find, you would can that for quart times. So anything quart to above a pint is quart times, and anything pint and lower is pint times. Now, if you want to rebel can and change your times further than that, go for it. But for now, rule of thumb is that. So those meatballs had canned. They are actually cooling in the canner right now. So I am going to prep the SpaghettiOs. And unfortunately for me, I am a super professional. I forgot to film taking these out of the canner, but there is a picture of them on the cover photo of this. But me, I failed you guys. I'm so sorry. This is called O-ring pasta, or I believe it's annalini. Don't quote me on that, or I might not have said it right. But I just wanted, the nostalgic circle pasta. It was a little bit expensive, and I can't find it locally anywhere. I had to get it on Amazon, which is not ideal, but just a one-time thing, and it was a little bit expensive, but like not the bulk of our diet, and it's just fun. Okay, it just looks normal. It looks like SpaghettiOs. Like, that's what I was going for. It's just something fun. So add that pasta in, and then I add my seasonings. To each pint jar, I do like a quarter teaspoon of garlic, onion powder, and oregano. You could use fresh garlic and onion and oregano if you want. Did not have it. So I did use the high quality spices from the ever exclusive Club of Samuel. You know what? It's fine. You don't have to make everything. And sometimes Samuel has them for a good price. Anyway, for the sauce portion of this, you could use your homemade like tomato sauce, marinara sauce, whatever you want to call it. I have a roasted tomato sauce recipe on my website that I normally use for this. The thing with that though is I cook it down till it like mounds on a spoon and it's really thick. So you have to add water to this. This time around, I'm using my tomato soup. I made some tomato soup a couple years ago when I was trying to figure out like a more rustic recipe with like chunks and stuff, and it was not good. It was really watery and I just didn't like it. So I saved these jars because I knew I would use them to can more of my mock SpaghettiOs. So I'm going to just open the jars and I'm going to put them in the pan and heat them up. And then I'm going to blend them very smooth. Why I heat the liquid and I don't just like throw it in the jars is because starting with everything hot in the canner allows you to heat it up and can it a little bit faster than starting with everything cold. And that's a little bit better for canning pasta. It just gives you a better texture because then you don't have the pasta sitting there in the cold liquid, slowly heating in the canner. It's already good and hot and ready to go. And it just kind of cuts some minutes off of the pasta sitting. You don't want like glue on plasta. Lord have mercy, I can't talk today. So I'm going to blend this up nice and smooth. And notice this is actually pretty thick when it's blended up. So it had separated in the jar and the tomato water was pretty, like half the jar was tomato water, it looked like. But then you blend it up and it's like, oh, it's kind of thick. So after I split this out between all the jars, I do add a little bit of water to this pot and kind of like swirl it up to get the rest of the tomatoes out. But you want to make sure you have enough water to cook that pasta in during the canning process or it just gets really dry and it's an odd texture. And I know because I've done it. I used my roasted tomato sauce I think a couple years ago when I first started doing this and I was like, this is weird. The chickens got it. But if I take a quart of my really thick tomato sauce and then add like a pint of water, that's perfection. And it's enough water to cook that pasta and give it a good texture. So while I let that heat up, I'm going to get the meatballs out of the canner. When you take things out of the canner, a jar lifter is very nice to have instead of your bare hands or a pot holder. You always want to remove those hot jars to a heat-proof surface lined with a towel. Why? Because this is when thermal shock can happen. Really, is your jar can shatter because it's very, very hot and it's touching a very cold surface on the bottom and it can go boom. And I think everybody has seen that viral reel. It's been floating around Facebook and Instagram. It's probably here on YouTube too, where that little grandma was pulling some pasta sauce out of her water bath canner and set them in a glass like Pyrex dish and it shattered. That can happen. And that's simply because you are taking those jars and sitting them on a cold surface. That's why all of my recipes are going to tell you to remove the jar from the canner to a heat-proof surface lined with a towel. That prevents that. I've never had it happen. Now, if you had like a micro crack or something, removing them from the canner really fast could cause it, but that's inherent risks with everything, and that's why we look our jars over when we're washing them. So now we're going to ladle this into about 1-inch headspace. Whenever you're pressure canning, it doesn't matter what you're pressure canning, you want to leave 1-inch headspace. I don't care if you're pressure canning peaches and the normal headspace for peaches is 1/2 inch. When you're pressure canning, it's 1 inch. And I think that's where a lot of people get into some trouble when they're canning tomatoes. I get pictures all the time of I canned tomato juice or this tomato sauce in my pressure canner and it blew up everywhere. I learned that the hard way because I was like 1/2 inch headspace. No, when you're pressure canning, even if it's something high acid, you are going to leave 1-inch headspace. What happens at the more extreme temperatures past boiling, even at boiling, your food's going to swell. And that's the canning process. It swells, pushes the air out, and then when it cools back down, it shrinks and sucks that lid down with it. When you pressure can, you're bringing it to 240 degrees or even higher Fahrenheit. And what can happen is if there's not enough room for all that swelling, your lid's going to blow off. And tomatoes are just ornery. So I always just say, too much headspace is better than not enough. And it doesn't mean that you add a tablespoon of liquid to a quart jar and can it and say, well, Ruby told me too much headspace. Don't be dumb, okay? 1 inch is plenty. For pie filling, add a little bit extra, but you're not going to pressure can that anyway. So now I'm going to add some water from the sink and just rinse that pan out and just make sure that each jar has enough liquid to cook in it. Now, when you are canning pasta, you don't want to make like a bunch of jars ahead of time and then let them sit as you load your canner, unload your canner, and then add the next ones. You just want to do as many jars will go in your canner at a time because you don't want that pasta to sit. It will rehydrate, but the thing is for uncooked pasta to rehydrate instead of like rehydrating dehydrated cooked pasta, it just gets gluey and it'll just like be stuck to the bottom of your jar, very unfortunately. So work quickly. I mean, it doesn't have to be breakneck speed, as you can see. Just work quickly. Stay on task. Don't get distracted. Don't go like do your makeup and change your clothes and go outside and play with the baby goats for a while. Like, do it, get it in the canner, and then be done with it. Now, once you get it filled up, I give it a good stir just to get everything distributed and to get those pastas kind of like floating around there. And then wipe those jar rims, lids, and bands. That's it. Now I do pressure can this for 10 minutes since it's high acid, and then I do properly heat this before eating it. I don't eat this cold. That's number one, gross, but also whenever I can pasta, I do take precautions as to properly heat my food before I eat it. That's as simple as that. Now, you could put the lids on and shake it up and do it that way, but I've learned some of the lid brands I use only want it to be till the jar spins and they will leak when you do that. So do with that what you may. If you want to shake them, go for it. Doesn't matter to me. So I'm reusing lids again here, and we talked about that. And just be thoughtful of different lid brands, and how you tighten the bands, because the ball lids are going to want to be fingertip tight, which means you're going to hold them and screw them like another quarter turn. And then the heavier lids, like the Superbs and the 4 jars, are just going to be till the jar spins. So make sure you understand the lid brand you're using and if you're supposed to heat them before use or how you're supposed to tighten it, because it will affect how those lids seal. That is very important and an often overlooked thing. I don't know what the word is. I can't find my words today, guys, but I hope you enjoy this recipe. Everything is on my website. The meatballs, the SpaghettiOs, rustic tomato soup, tomato sauce, all the things. And free printable version, it's redfeatherfarmohio.com. Throw these in the pressure canner. It cans for 10 minutes and then get them out. You've got a shelf-stable meal that brings back those 90s nostalgia. It's so fun. I hope you love it. Happy canning!